Welcome everyone. So this session is intended for people that might be new to VS Code or use the ISE, they want to switch over. Just generally get some tips and tricks around editing, debugging your PowerShell code as well, linting as well. Those who've been in this session with James might know I am the maintainer of PSScriptAnalyzer, so there will be heavy focus on advanced customized features of PSScriptAnalyzer that you can enable that aren't enabled out of the box. Some formatting, some fancy new stuff as well that I haven't shown before and that are super new in VS Code, like for example developing and debugging from within the container. Very nice when you're making global changes. And with that, let's start. Just to get a bit of an idea of the audience, who here uses VS Code mainly as a workhorse for PowerShell development? Okay, and so assume the rest will be using ISE and is interested in switching over, is that right? Yeah. So how is it in terms of PowerShell versions? How many people use PowerShell Core as their main version? Not many people yet? Oh, some people, yeah. You will see I'm mainly using PowerShell Core. It will actually simplify the user experience when using PowerShell Core, but both versions are supported in VS Code. So let's look at it. Maybe some more people are coming in. I should maybe start with the sponsors. As I mentioned, a conference always needs sponsors for it to happen. There's lots of people there, so thanks for the organizers as well, but specifically ScriptRunner and IronGate. So a bit about me, for people who don't know me, I'm a DevOps engineer at the BGSS, we are a consultancy. We do everything from developing, testing, building out, across all stacks, Azure, AWS. I've been there now for 3 months, I'm enjoying it quite a bit. If any of you are thinking of looking or moving to a new role, just have a chat with me afterwards. We're hiring loads of different people. If you are just a developer or an ops guy or a front-end developer, doesn't matter. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the Cloud and Data Center Management category because this is where PowerShell falls into. And I kind of got this from open source contributions and some of the speaking engagements that I do. So I have actually made changes to the VS Code PowerShell experience, PowerShell itself, and PSScriptAnalyzer that I'm a maintainer of. I've authored some smaller modules that aren't that well known. They're mainly around the tab completion experience. So maybe developers who use the .NET CLI or VSTS CLI, those two modules will provide you tab completion when you install them from the PS gallery. And Push CLI is a very new one, and the idea is, so now we've got like 5 or 10 different tab completion modules. How do we bootstrap all of them? And the idea behind this module is there's one function, which is the bootstrapping of all the modules for getting tab completion for native binaries. You can find me on GitHub or Twitter on the Bergmeister or @Bergmeister handles. This is where I'm quite present quite a lot, and you can reach me if you've got questions or issues or just want to be up to date on generally what happens in the PowerShell world. So what will be the talk about? I've mentioned it a bit. So VS Code 101, looking at formatting, like what are different formatting styles using container technologies. Cloud Shell, which can be integrated into VS Code as well, with some interesting use cases that I had recently at the client, and code analysis, which is basically PSScriptAnalyzer. So VS Code 101, I'll be switching quite often between presentation and demos, or just showing things in the browser. For people who aren't that familiar with VS Code yet, it's a bit of a different concept in terms of editor. If you've worked with the ISE or Visual Studio, it is very lightweight, so it's not very discoverable at first. So here are a couple of links that I recommend you to check out. I'll publish this presentation later on. There is a GitHub repository for PSDay. So in a few days you will find a presentation. And those links will be useful, especially getting familiar with keyboard shortcuts. and just general concepts of VS Code. So one of the concepts of VS Code are workspaces. A workspace is loosely speaking the folder where you open your solution in. In the ISE that didn't really matter, in VS Code it matters, because that's basically where you see the file system. And let me just do a demo of this, that you see what I mean by this. So here I've got a folder, and if I open this in code here, so first of all, for people that are new to VS Code, we have here different files on tabs. By default, we've got nothing when you start the editor. On the left here, we have got Explorer, which we can toggle here. We have got here a terminal, where we can run our commands, and we can configure different shells. But how do I configure this? So I've got this menu bar here, but there's actually not too many options compared to the things that you're searching for. So there is this concept of commands. So I'm going to press now Control-Shift-P. I could also press just Control-P, but the Shift just gives me this greater sign, which is the operator to search for commands. So now this makes it more searchable. So say if I want to search for commands that the PowerShell extension gives me, I get all those commands and can explore things. So if I want to change the shell, let's type shell, I can restart the current shell, or select a different default shell. So this is generally how you will find yourself working in the beginning, exploring different options and commands is via the command palette. And if I delete everything in here, I just get a drop down for the files. I can search for them. So it takes a while getting used to this new concept, but it's important to understand them. This is how you can get effective and efficient in VS Code. At the end, it's still an editor, but those are the tools that will make you really fast at doing things and will make it a nice experience, but it does take some learning practice. So what else do we have here? We have a search bar. I could just do Control F or Control Shift F, where I can do find and replace either just in the file or in all files. This I find quite useful. In the past, I was using tools like WinGrab for doing auto replacement of certain contents in a file. VS Code has that integrated into it, and it's really blazingly fast, because one of the main arguments why people were using WinGrab is its speed, and the speed is equivalent to what VS Code is offering now. So that is really great. There is integration with source control. I personally still prefer to use Git from the command line, but you can use it by the editor as well. It would tell you, for example, here the branch name that I am on, if you're behind, or you need to pull or push, and all of those things are there for you. And on your VS Code installation, when you install the first time, you might not see those icons. So where are they coming from? So VS Code has got an extension model. So by default, the editor is very bare, doesn't do very much. The idea is to extend things. So if I install only VS Code and you start editing a PS1 file, you will not have a good experience unless you install the PowerShell extension. This will give you the syntax highlighting, tab completion, and debugging capabilities. And if we look into it, there's actually two PowerShell extensions. There's a preview and the normal extension. About, I think, half a year ago, this started out because the PowerShell team wanted to enhance the experience without breaking changes, using a completely new concept. And at first this concept wasn't very stable, so they made a preview extension. Now we're at the point where I actually recommend people to use the preview, because certain features are only available in the preview, and depending on which PowerShell version you want to use, so say you only want to use version 5 or 6, you're good to use the preview. But say if you use PowerShell version 3 or 4, and by that I mean your computer has version 3 or 4, then the preview extension won't have support for it. So only latest version of Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core is supported by the preview extension. At some point we hope that the preview extension just goes away and there's only one extension. At the moment they live side by side. They both have advantages and disadvantages. Some are more or less stable in different areas, but generally I would recommend the preview extension to install, and there's other extensions you can see here as well. There is the PowerShell Pro Tools. This one is not free, which is standing out a bit because otherwise all the other extensions are free and you can just click install and you've got it on your machine. You don't even need to restart VS Code for most use cases, which makes it quite nice. And there's other extensions as well. I will show examples here. So I mentioned those extensions, but there's other extensions that I recommend. The Dutchie Character one I do recommend. So where does this come into place? So PowerShell was designed to be, you can just copy paste your scripts. And what some people might have found before, I've definitely found it myself. I've copy pasted something from the internet and then something weird happened. It kind of started working and in the middle it aborted. And sometimes what can happen is that you can have a non-standard Unicode character and the PowerShell engine gets confused by it. And the purpose of this extension is to highlight it in the editor, so you get a squiggly or a red line under it. So you can be alerted that maybe you have accidentally copy-pasted something with a dodgy encoding, which could later on cause you weird problems or take you a long time to realize what the hell is going on here. As people have integrated extensions for integrating with Stack Overflow searches or trying to get a better syntax highlighting. I think the default one is okay, but some people like to personalize it a bit more or change it to their liking. There's a lot of links here as well about PowerShell extension and Visual Studio Code. There's a couple of concepts here as well. I will walk you through some of those in the demo, but I encourage you to check those out as well. It's a lot of stuff, which is good because you want to have a lot of documentation when you've got questions for specific use cases. I can't go through all use cases, but I will show you a couple of very common ones. A common one that people have is, I'm from the IC, yes, I want to adapt to VS Code, but I want the transition to be as smooth as possible. This link here will give you a couple of guidelines on how to configure VS Code in such a manner that some of the previous experience from the IC you still get, like the coloring and just the way F5 works. So I encourage you to check those out. And with that, let's jump into the demo. So you've noticed here I've got still my extensions, so how do I get back to the files? You can get back here or just use the shortcut. So at first, if it's big enough, we see here there is a PowerShell version that we have used. By default it will go to a PowerShell core. You can change the version that you want to use. It is basically a setting. So how do we change settings? Generally, I haven't talked about this yet. So command palette, settings. So it's important to be aware there is workspace and user settings. Workspace settings override user settings. This is by design. And the idea is if I set a workspace setting in this .VS-Code folder that will be generated behind the scenes, there's a settings.json, and the idea is, so you've got a project, you want to define a code style and standard, you want to have your braces on the same or next line, that would be workspace settings, because if a new contributor comes along, someone joins the project, they want to start coding, but they use a different style, you want your project to define the style, and that someone else opening the editor in your project, they should have those defaults applied to them instead of them using their own personal preferences. And that is the idea behind workspace settings. You open it there and it will be pre-configured. You could even have here an extensions.json file and recommend people to install certain extensions that are useful for doing development on your project. You might be a .NET project, so you might recommend the C# extension. And the experience that people will be, the open VS Code, and the editor will say, this project recommends installing those extensions. Do you want them? You just click yes, and then the editor does it for you. So this makes for a very good experience when switching between different projects, and especially in the open source world, people have different standards that they adhere to. You don't want people to start to write code, open a pull request against it, and then, oh, sorry, we don't do this style here, this is the style. But in this world, even if you write a README and put in all the effort, I don't have time to read your big README. I just want to start writing code. And that's where workspace settings come in. You don't have to write a big README about your style, because it feels like, does every project have to write about their style with this style guidance? We want to have it codified, and by having the settings in the workspace, and I encourage you to check those into your Git repository, you will be able to get rid of that. Get rid of writing a big README about your style. You have it in code. Maybe in a README, I encourage people to use VS Code as the recommended editor, and everything will just work magically from there on. So in those settings here, there is a JSON editor if you prefer to use JSON, which I do, but there is also a UI, which is this one here, where you could start typing, and you get here all the categories, different languages, Python, Git. In JSON, there's not much of a difference. You still get tab completion, and I encourage you to basically check out the PowerShell settings, because those are all the settings relevant to the PowerShell extension. And you will see there's a lot of settings around code formatting, feature flags, because it's a preview extension, so some features you can opt into, default PowerShell version, and you can, for example, enable or disable script analysis depending on your enterprise. We have seen enterprises where the antivirus scanner sees the extension actually doing work behind the scenes and sees it as a vulnerability or possibly as a malware, because it can't differentiate between it. So some enterprises are really locked down, and this setting, for example, allows you to disable some of it. I usually encourage you to have it enabled, which is the default, because it will provide you a lot of useful information that I will show in a bit. And here you would also define coming back to what I originally wanted to say, the exe path of your PowerShell version that you want to use. Let me see if I can find my personal settings. So those are my personal settings, because in the workspace, I don't know which version you have it installed or where you have them installed. And here I'm pointing to PowerShell 7, which will give you the best experience. If you're not sure which version you use, you should see it here. And whenever you open a PowerShell file here, you will always get this integrated console. And this is the console that the extension uses behind the scenes to do the work, give you information, like for example here it's telling me, oh, this variable is assigned but never used. And when you're writing code in the IC, you're used to pressing F5. You can still do F5 and it executes it in the terminal, but it's the integrated terminal, not a terminal that you create here by saying create new integrated terminal. That's the third one here. This is the same as if I were to open PowerShell here. So all the commands, remember, they get sent to the integrated console. Sometimes, especially people who have worked with it before, might have seen that sometimes IntelliSense stops working. So what is IntelliSense? I start typing and get completion on what it is. that I want to type, so I can tap, and it gives that there for me. Drop downs. So people from the IC are used to that with doing control dot here. It just happens as I type along, which makes it very nice. So this is an advantage of VS Code over ISE, where the inner development loop has been optimized much further. Sometimes you might find that it stops working and you wonder, you go dot and nothing's coming up. So sometimes it happens. It can be sometimes once in an hour or at random times. Some people have very good experience, some people have very bad experience. We're not sure where it's coming from, but basically the shell here can sometimes get stuck. So what you do here in this case, you can just restart the current session. And here you will see a new one starting up. Let's do this again and watch that here in the corner where it says starting PowerShell, so it takes a bit of time to come up, and after that you're good to go. We've seen people just closing VS Code and reopening it. Yes, that does the job as well, but there's a more elegant way of dealing with this. Yes?
Sometimes, like you put there the variable, it's telling you that's not used. I have the experience of writing the header that, putting a variable and then about to go and use the variable. It takes a bit of time for the script analyzer to realize that it actually used it. Do you have that kind of thing?
Yeah, so as we write here, so if we were to use the variable right here,
Yeah.
On typing, so right now it goes away.
Yeah, the experience I've had,
Yeah.
it takes a bit more time to realize it and use it. And then after a bit,
It should usually, like in this case, be quite fast.
yeah.
It could possibly be because the workspace is big, so meaning you might have 100 or 1,000 files that are contain a lot of code. That could mean the extension is analyzing a lot behind the scenes. Generally, it's supposed to be fast. We'd have to look at your use case. Unless it got stuck, I don't have a good explanation for why it would take a long time. So sometimes what I have seen is opening it from scratch. You just need to poke it a bit, just using the keyboard a bit, just one or two key presses, basically poke it to reanalyze again. If you maybe find that it's not changing that, maybe just try typing one character and see what it does, just a space character, just to give it a bit of a poke.
I've seen something similar, particularly when I've got PowerShell Live. I'll go to tab completion, and it just says it's loading quite slow.
Okay.
I think it's about to mean the PowerShell Live.
That could be, yes. I've seen other people complain as well when the workspace is big. In this case, maybe I would recommend trying to open a smaller workspace. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to comment on it. So
Yeah.
the extension is fairly new. The PowerShell team has got a dedicated person, Tyler Leonard, working on the extension, trying to improve those use cases. In the last year, we have tripled the speed of PSScriptAnalyzer that has made improvements. There will be improvements going forward. I will show how the architecture works behind the scenes. There's one more trick we want to do this or next year that should speed up analysis generally. So we'll come back to performance in a bit. It is on the tracker. We have already done quite a bit. There's more to go. Okay, let's maybe jump a bit ahead to answer the question. The architecture of the VS Code extension is as follows. So the source code for extension you can find here, github.com/PowerShell/VS-Code. An extension in VS Code is actually just JSON, but then JSON is for adding things on top to it, like adding a new menu. But then lots of custom code was written for it to be performant and fast, so that's TypeScript code. There's a second module called PowerShell Editor Services, which is a .NET module. .NET was chosen because it's very fast. And this module here calls into ScriptAnalyzer. Both those modules are bundled within the extension. So that is what makes it very convenient. You install the extension, you get ScriptAnalyzer by default, but it gets installed in the extension. So it will mean you as a user, it will just work out of the box. But say you have a new system and you haven't installed ScriptAnalyzer, and you start to type invoke ScriptAnalyzer, which is, by the way, the commandlet for ScriptAnalyzer if you want to use it from the command line. This one won't work. You will first have to do install module PSScriptAnalyzer in external shells. In the integrated shell, you will have it available. And if we peek a bit behind the scenes, we can see where that is coming from. So this is where I have it locally installed, but I also see it is comes with the extension here. So that's why here in the integrated shell, I get it out of the box. If I went here, I wouldn't see the one that ships out of the box with the extension. So in the editor, yes, you get all of this out of the box because it bundles with it. And it also means, let me show something as well. I meant to talk about this a bit later on, but if I talk about it right now, it's worthwhile pointing it out. So the extension has a release cycle and it releases a new version. Actually, there was a new version released just this week, which brought a couple of new features. Some of those I will show. When ScriptAnalyzer releases, that is a separate release. The good news is, if you install a new release, the extension will automatically pick it up. We recommend you installing a newer version, so you can actually play with it and give us feedback before we then suddenly say, so in the next month we will update the PowerShell extension, shipping with the new version of ScriptAnalyzer, hitting 1 million people. Then potentially there might be a problem. We have this cycle so that we can actually detect problems earlier in a new version of ScriptAnalyzer. So we'll potentially have weeks or months where you can try a newer version that might be faster or give you new features. It might take a while until the extension ships with this new version as well. So that's why I recommend, if there's a new version of ScriptAnalyzer, try installing it. Please give us feedback so that we can make modifications. The new version of the extension that got released this week is shipping with version 1.18.3, and before it was 1.18.0, I think. Can't remember exactly. But we wanted to release and we found problems, so we fixed those problems in ScriptAnalyzer, released a new version. We actually had to release 2 patch versions before we had a final version that we were happy with. And then we decided to release the VS-Code extension with the new version of ScriptAnalyzer. And the lessons for us learned from mistakes in the past was A, do this cycle. It's very helpful getting early feedback from a small selection of people. And B, use feature flags. So all settings are usually behind a configuration setting in VS Code and ScriptAnalyzer, which makes help things smooth out a bit as we develop new features that might need more user feedback in the early days. Okay, coming back to the demo here. So this is something a bit more sophisticated, just example code to show you what you can do. Some people might know it gives you some help here. Oh, there is a problem here. It's an alias. I can sometimes do control dot and replace it with it. Great. I'm not sure why does it want me to do it. Okay, look at the documentation. And there will be some explanation of why the editor recommends using X, Y, or Z. Not all of those rules are auto-fixable. For aliases, it's about readability, Also, some aliases were removed in newer versions of PowerShell core, namely curl. So that's why generally there is a rule that recommends not using aliases. Personally, I actually love using aliases when it comes to typing out things in the shell, because it's fast. And I tend to work by writing a script in the shell first, trying things out, and then just getting the history, copy paste it into a function, and then, now I gotta replace those aliases. Well, actually, it shouldn't be a chore. There's two ways of doing it. You don't want to go for each one or replace it with it. Previously, you could run it by a command line in VScriptAnalyzer. There is a -fix property, and this is how you could auto-fix stuff. Actually, now introducing, with this new week, you will have a new setting where on-formatting replaces it. And you can just Control-A, the whole document, format. So formatting here, I've used the shortcut Control-KF. If I forget about this, format document shows me the shortcut as well. And this is a new feature that is behind the feature flag. So let's have a look at the features. So autocorrect aliases in this case here is the feature flag that I've turned on. Based on your feedback, we will turn on certain features by default. Certain features we know the people will have divided opinions. Aliases, we know the community is divided. Some people are pro and con against that. So this setting we might not enable by default just because we know we will upset some people, and we want to rather leave it as a choice to for the user to opt in to this behavior. But we offer you this ability now. There is a code lens, so let me show this. I've defined here a function, and here it shows me actually where it's being referenced, and I could go to the definition here. Very useful. Some people sometimes complain that the code lens is not going across files. It's not completely true, so I could go to a second file here and define the function here, the function foo, go back to it, and for example do an F12, takes me to the definition, and I see the reference here. So you just need to import the function definition, and then it works across files. So if you've got a big workspace and work across files, you get an experience similar to Visual Studio where you can go to definition or go to reference. Makes it useful for reading code, especially if it's nested. Talking about code formatting style. So you've seen there's a lot of PowerShell code formatting settings. And what I suggest you as a user, use the preset setting, and there's basically 3 options available to you for the preset. Let's see if I have it here. PowerShell code formatting, the preset. What this gives you is a predefined set of rules that usually do the job for 98% of the people. And those are the 3 rules: OTBS, Strustrup, and Ellman. And here in the link, it refers to a very useful document written by someone in the community giving actual examples. Most of those 3 options boil down to here, brace on the next line, which is the Ellman style. K and R, okay, say on the same line. Strustrup on the same line, but what's the difference? The difference is very subtle. It is, when we look here at the else on a new line, else here on the same line, they call it cuddled. It comes from an old C style that people like, where they want to have it really terse and condensed down. It is a style choice that is up to the user. People have different preferences, so set the preference you want, and once you have applied it, when you format, let me show you just an example here. Control-KF, this is the default. It formats me in the way how I want it to be done. This is again why you should check in your workspace settings, because the user just at the end, I can write it in my style. Before I submit the PR, I go format document or format the code that I change, because I might not want to generate a big diff. And it does the job for you without you having to worry about details. And it also does those small things that you don't have to do by hand, like the white space and just like one character between them, and all of those nitty-gritty things. The formatter just takes care of it for you. Something to say about the default experience: not all rules are enabled by default. ScriptAnalyzer has, I think, around 50 rules. About 20-ish rules are enabled by default. So we show that there is a menu here that actually shows me those rules. I can actually add rules, enable them, but what should be said, this is more of a read-only view that shows you that it doesn't persist. So the moment I close and reopen, it's gone. There's a better way of persisting. I will show that. But this is just to make you aware, not all of those are enabled by default. So what I suggest to do in this case, have a settings file. Let me show this in a second folder here where I have prepared this already. So here I'm showing an example of the extensions JSON, recommending the PowerShell extension. And here I've defined one setting, PSScriptAnalyzer settings.psd1. It is this name because it's for implicit analysis. So if I were to run invoke script analyzer from this path, I don't have to specify the settings file path explicitly using the -settings options. It just picks it up automatically if I name the file like this. So this tells VS Code, use the settings file. And in the settings file, I can declare my defaults. I want to have those rules enabled or disabled. So look here, this is quite complex. Actually, don't worry, just put an empty hash table in there. This will make all rules being turned on by default. So this is something quite useful that I do in a new project. Create that file, have an empty hash table, because this is how it works behind the scenes, and have the settings pointing to this, and then you've got all rules enabled. And when you do this, you will see, let me just compare this. Is it big enough? So here, you see there's no warning. There could be a warning because most people might not mean that. They might mean a -equal, not assigning A to B. And in the other editor where I've defined all rules, it's actually giving me a warning. So that is just one of many use cases. There's more rules available that you might not see or be aware of. And this is how you can enable them in the editor. I think going forward in the future, we want to simplify the experience that if this file exists, then you don't have to define a setting for it. It should just automatically pick it up. So there's work to be done to optimize the experience. But this is the main recommendation and the takeaway here. You can get more rules and get them integrated into the editor. You can write custom rules in ScriptAnalyzer as well. Some people might know that. And you can customize ScriptAnalyzer itself as well. So I'm going to show you things that actually wouldn't work out of the box if you just had an empty hash table, and I will only briefly explain them a bit. So there's 3 new rules that were added this year, brand new by the PowerShell team. And the idea is, with Windows PowerShell versus PowerShell Core, having such a different set of commandlets, some of them not being available in some versions, there might have been some breaking changes. And actually, people have complained about this in the past. Between version 3, 4, and 5, there were changes as well, and you want to write scripts that work against all versions. So what we have done is enable you to say, I want to target those versions if I'm using a syntax that is not compatible for this version. Give me a warning. Very similarly for commands. Yes? By default, how do you know which versions you target? I don't know against which versions you... you have that implicitly via the IntelliSense. IntelliSense will automatically already say, um, yeah, um, so okay, just give me an example. So say John joins the team, he hasn't installed PowerShell Core, so version 6, and you're developing against this version. IntelliSense uses the version installed locally on that machine, and the user might have chosen, because it's a user setting using which PowerShell version you use, you can't force the user to use certain PowerShell versions, and IntelliSense uses that shell to give you those commands. So that's why, unless you explicitly say, this is the version we develop against, it wouldn't work like this. It's also the way it works behind the scenes. IntelliSense uses the shell to call PowerShell and give more command information about it. Those rules here have JSON files, basically containing every command and switch, not every, but most of the commands. So this is an opt-in here. It is a subset of IntelliSense. It is not really the same. This feature is aimed at saying, I want to develop against certain versions, especially older versions, because the use case is usually not just the current version. It is, I am working in PowerShell 6, but I still want to write code that also works in 5. So this was the idea behind this feature that the PowerShell team has developed. I can see where you're coming from. Hmm. Yes, yes, especially because a lot of things you can't predict or assume. This is, I think, very much a project or user choice, which versions you target. If you target more than just one version, I think for the special case, if you target just one version, I think it's an interesting thought. But sometimes implementing those things, when you look at the implementation details, aren't as easy as you would think of just from a high level looking at them. Sometimes you just have to take the things that are being given out. So I've contributed features of PSScriptAnalyzer that are very useful to me. This feature here, someone at the PowerShell team has developed for their use case, and it's all basically free code to you. If there's something that you would want to add or tweak, we recommend you opening a PR. People usually only implement the things that are useful to them. The PowerShell team tries to have a holistic point of view and have something catering for the most common scenarios or use cases. And I think the scenario of targeting multiple versions, I think, is more important. So here we can define targets. Some of those are PowerShell versions. Here, some of those are more specific also to the OS. It could also be Linux. This is for commands, and this is here for types. How do you know all those magic strings? You go to the documentation, so PowerShell/PSScriptAnalyzer. You will first of all find a big README with lots of introductory information. For specific rules, there is a rule documentation folder here. I just search for compatible to get all those compatible rules, and those will have more information about what the strings are, what they mean in those settings file, and how to construct such a settings file for the versions that you target. And what you get as an end user is saying here, for example, hovering over this, saying in version 3 and 5.1, this specific parameter was not available. Here, this syntax doesn't work in version 3 or 4 because it was only added in 5. Or this type here only added in PowerShell core. So this is something nice that you can sprinkle on top that can help you. It is not a silver bullet because it doesn't contain all types. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the GAC, which is the Global Assembly Cache, but basically it is kind of like a black hole because it contains so many things and commandlets that we couldn't ship those in the JSON file. So for example, WinForms is not there because it would just blow up the size of PSScriptAnalyzer. We have gone from something like 2 megabytes to 18 megabytes compressed. When you install via the PS Gallery, it actually compresses as a zip. And if we did this for WinForms, it would go to 100 megabytes or potentially even further. And most users wouldn't use that functionality. The PowerShell team has said they want to look into extending this so people can write their own JSON files. If they want to target their own specific infrastructure, where they maybe have installed the Active Directory commandlets, so they want to maybe include that in the JSON files. So there's a bit more work to be done. With the current way it works, people could look at the code and try to generate it themselves, but it requires some skill to do that. At the moment, we ship with a couple of those files. You can actually look at them. When we look at the installation of PSScriptAnalyzer, we will see in the settings folder in the compatibility profiles, we will see all of those JSON files behind the scenes. You could just add them in and it will pick it up based on the file name. So this is something that you can do for getting more code analysis out. Let's see how we are in time. I think we're good in time. So any questions so far about the configuration options that are available, or some other things that you would like me to show? Yeah.
When I open my script, I usually have everything open. Is there a way of elapsing everything?
So you mean regions? As in
Yeah.
Collapse all. So I think with this one here, notice the search. Collapse folders. Yeah. I think there's features available.
There is a way to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So okay. Moving on, what I would like to show now is something that is quite new, which is developing in a container, which can be quite useful. So I've mentioned before that I've developed this module that bootstraps you CLI tab completers. But for testing the module, I don't want to run the test on my machine, installing and uninstalling stuff, because who knows, at the point of development I might do something really bad and delete a couple of things that I don't want to delete. So containers allow you to start from a clean, fresh system, be sandboxed as well, and this was a very good use case of using a new feature in VS Code that was added only this year, a few months ago, called dev containers. And they actually have 3 extensions. You can do it with WSL as well, or remote SSH. And the idea is on your dev box, maybe your dev box doesn't have much power and you're compiling something really hard, or when your code runs, you require something beefy. Maybe you're doing machine learning, you maybe have a GPU in your other room that is doing the hard work. And people used to add a remote into those systems and then install an editor. Actually, you want to just have like a server in the back of the room that does the work and just have a light connection to it. And with those extensions, so they are called remote development tools. So there's the one for WSL, which is the Windows subsystem for Linux, for SSH, and I'm using here the one for containers. So what this enables me, if I define a dev container folder, and I will show you how to do that. This one I've pre-configured. Then the moment I open it, VS Code will tell me, do you want to open this in container? Or I could just see here, where it says reopen in container. We'll do this. Keep in mind, you need to first configure Docker. I've got an unsaved file, I don't think I need that. So what it's doing now, you might have seen it briefly disappearing and reappearing. And here, what it's doing, it's setting up the container. The first time you run it, it will take a while because it might need to download the first image, but afterwards it's cached. You can rebuild your container if you change it, or you want a completely clean environment. And here we are already. Let's look, bash. So people who work with Docker might know that by default we are using Linux containers. We can, if we want to, switch over here to Windows containers if we wanted to, because PowerShell core is cross-platform in most cases. It doesn't matter too much if you're using Linux or Windows. Linux will be faster because the images are smaller, so I'll recommend using this. If it doesn't work out of the box, because maybe your tests are using something Windows specific, just switch over to Windows containers. Looking at the Docker file here, we just use the PowerShell image. So the default, I want to stress this again, this is the default of the PowerShell image, is Linux as well. Have a look at Docker Hub and explore different tags. There will be tags for different Windows versions, Server Core or Nano, and then you just specify your tag name here, and then it will download that specific image. The rest here we don't need to worry so much, because I will show you later how to generate that for you. You don't need, I haven't written all of that code. I will show you how to do that and get it auto-generated for you. So it just works out of the box. You can, for example, define what is your default shell. We could change this to PWSH if we wanted to. We could also say, okay, those extensions we need. This extension kind of makes sense when we do PowerShell development. Maybe some of the other extensions that you like as well. This will be a bit like using a vanilla new version of VS Code. So if you have extensions that you love and like, add them in there.